Found text messages between two FBI agents working on the Hillary Clinton email investigation.
And new political fallout here in Washington over the Steve Wynn sexual misconduct scandal in Las Vegas. Welcome to America's news headquarters from Washington. I'm Leah Gabriel.
Great to have you in Washington.
Sure.
Welcome. 2 big hours ahead. Nice to be with you at home. I'm Leland Vittert. President Trump back at the White House today, arrived yesterday evening after speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. The president returning to a policy battle here in Washington over his immigration proposal, and also is preparing for his first State of the Union address. Rich Edson live at the White House, which is very much at work this weekend, as are you, Rich. Nice to see you.
Good to talk to you, Leland. And there's plenty to work on here at the White House. There's government funding. There are all these other proposals that the White House is pushing on Congress. And then, of course, the linchpin of all of this is immigration and what to do about the hundreds of thousands who were brought to this country illegally as children, are here as adults, the so-called dreamers. The White House has floated a proposal on this, saying that there's a path to citizenship open for 1.5 million of these so-called dreamers. And a 10 to 12 year path to citizenship. The White House put that on the table, but in return, it wants $25 billion for a trust fund to build a border wall system, the elimination of the visa lottery system, and the elimination of chain migration. The president maintains that he does, and the White House wants, to solve the problem with the dreamers.
Everybody wants to solve the DACA problem. They've been wanting to solve it for a long time. It should have been solved by President Obama. It would have been easier to solve it, especially when he had the House and the Senate. They could have solved it in a day, but they didn't solve it. He didn't solve things, and he did something that he didn't have the right to do. You understand? He did an executive order, and that was no good. And by the way, the court, it wasn't me. The courts were not upholding that executive order. You have to do it through Congress. Yeah. I want to solve the DACA problem.
Senate Democrats, at least the leadership, have rejected the president's proposal. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says that the president is simply using DACA recipients, the dreamers, to get what he wants on the border wall, essentially using them. To that, the White House press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, responded, quote, "Actually, Senator Schumer, America's legal immigration system has been torn apart for decades by Washington politicians like yourself, who prefer open borders and sanctuary cities over law and order and popular common sense reforms." The president is also getting some criticism on the right. Heritage Action says of the White House proposal that any proposal that expands the amnesty-eligible population risks opening a Pandora's box. So as the White House pushes on one end, lawmakers on Capitol Hill, particularly in the Senate, trying to figure out a way to tie in and figure out this immigration issue and budgeting and all else they are now tasked with. Leland, back to you.
Yeah, and there's not even really consensus among House Republicans on any of those either. Rich Edson live at the White House. More as it happens this Saturday. Rich, thank you. Leah has more.
And meantime, President Trump's latest immigration proposal is drawing criticism on Capitol Hill. Ellison Barber is following the story for us. So, Ellison, little criticism, no surprise, right?
Right. People are talking about it, and there are critics on both the left and the right. Democrats say that the framework, the proposal here, is offensive. They also say that it undercuts American values.
That plan is a campaign to make America white again. It's a plan that says over 50% of the current legal immigration will be cut back, that many people will be sent out of the country.
He wants to put tens of billions of dollars at a time that our country is screaming for infrastructure investment that many of the best experts on homeland security do not believe we need.
Some Republicans are attacking the plan as amnesty.
This is a sacrifice of the rule of law. This says, in your lifetime or in mine, we will never see the respect for the rule of law restored again.
But others are okay with it. Senator Tom Cotton is a key conservative voice when it comes to immigration. In a statement, he called the White House framework generous and humane, adding, quote, "It protects those eligible for DACA who are here through no fault of their own, but it also will prevent us from ending up back here in 5 years by securing the border and putting an end to extended family chain migration." Before the White House's outline made its way to Congress, Senator Lindsey Graham said bipartisan talks in the Senate would continue regardless of what happens at the White House. On Thursday, a senator told Fox News that it'd be best if the president stayed out of the Senate's immigration talks, but many on the Hill previously complained that there wasn't enough clarity on what the president wanted. At the very least, they have some clarity in regards to that, and that's something, Leah, Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell had pointed out, saying this is good guidance, and in a statement he actually thanked the president for sending it, so they have something a little more to work with.
And maybe what the president really wants is just to get the ball rolling. All right, Ellison Barber, thank you.
All right, a little more on this with Florida Congressman Ted Yoho. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for being with us. You just heard Ellison's report. I'm guessing you're more in the Steve King camp than the Tom Cotton camp on this one.
No, actually, I mean, this is a situation that's been going on for over 36 years, and we've got a situation today. We've got to work through it, but it's got to start with border security, enforcement of the laws on the book, get rid of chain migration and the visa lottery system, and then we can deal with the DACA system.
So you would not be for a DACA deal, if you will, whatever that means, in a way that the president has lined out, until there's border security and chain migration, or you'd be okay with this idea of putting them all together in one package?
I'm okay with that, but it's got to be sequenced where you do border security and enforcement of the laws on the book. If not, people are going to rush our borders and come in if we're not enforcing the borders and border security and enforcing the laws on the book. So those have got to be the primary thing that we start with.
I'm confused. Specifically with what the president has proposed.
We'll try to unconfuse you.
Well, please, hopefully. Specifically with what the president has proposed, you're okay with that, or there needs to be more work done?
Well, there's a generality. I'm okay with the Goodlatte bill that Raul Labrador and Bob Goodlatte have worked on. I think there's some good things in there, but it's a framework, and so that's more specific, and I think as we work through this, you'll have some changes in that. I'm not for blanket amnesty, absolutely not, and I don't think many people in the House are. The other thing is this should not be associated with the funding bill come February 8th. There's no reason to put this with the funding bill.
You just said something very critical, is that, quote, not many people in the House are. For as much discussion as there has been about the Senate on this, whether it's sort of the Lindsey Graham group or the Tom Cotton group, House Republicans are far from united on this. Are House Republicans willing to hold either funding hostage or something else hostage to get the kind of deal that you are talking about here, that's something that would have a tough time making it through the Senate?
Again, it shouldn't be attached to the funding bill. Where there's commonality is we have to fix this. So there is a lot of commonality on that. But when you go to the Graham bill, Lindsey Graham's bill, that's amnesty. I'm more in the camp of the Raul Labrador and Bob Goodlatte bill, which is in alignment with the president and Tom Cotton.
I understand that, but the question is how are you going to get enough Republicans in the House on the same page on this? For as many opinions as there are in the Senate, there's a whole lot more in the House here. You guys don't seem to be on the same page yet.
Because there's not a common bill that's out there. You know, we've got the Graham bill that's being floated out there. You've got the Tom Cotton's proposals. You've got the White House. If we sit down and just start building off the Goodlatte and the Raul Labrador bill, that's going to be tweaked, and that'll bring people together.
The Goodlatte and Labrador bill don't have a prayer in the Senate. You and I both know that.
I disagree with that.
Oh, come on! Really, you're going to get 9 Democrats to vote for that? Come on.
Do the Democrats want to fix immigration for what's best for America, not what's best for people that are here illegally? These programs need to be best for Americans and the American citizens.
It's a great talking point, but the facts remain the same.
That's not a talking point. That's what I was sent there for.
Well, I appreciate you staying on principle, but the Democrats on the other side are going to say they're staying on principle. There's no way you're going to get 9 to sign on in the Goodlatte-Labrador bill. Is there a bill that reasonable people could agree you can get to 60 on in the Senate and get a majority in the House and enough House Republicans behind? It doesn't seem like you've even described anything close to that yet.
Yeah, there is, but it's got to start with something. And I think the Goodlatte bill has the best one to move forward. You know, there's going to be some move. There's going to be some wrangling, just like we did on the tax bill. When the first tax bill came out, nobody was going to pass it. Nobody was going to support it. But yet we had the major tax reform that's transformed our economy. So the same thing will happen with this. But the important thing is, do not tie it with the funding of the United States government. It's an important issue, and it should stand on its own. And if it's that important, let's bring people together and hash this out.
Well, noteworthy with the tax bill, you only needed to get to 51 in the Senate versus 60. But point well made. Congressman, good to see you, sir. We'll have you back here in Washington. Enjoy the warm weather in Florida, sir.
I will. Thank you. Take care.
Leah?
Newly revealed text messages between two FBI agents revealed details about the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email use. Lauren Blanchard joins us now with the latest.
Hi, Leah. Well, the text released by the Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley suggests senior FBI officials were concerned that being too tough on Hillary Clinton for her email use could come back to hurt them if she were elected president. The messages between the officials, now demoted FBI agent Peter Strzok and reassigned FBI lawyer Lisa Page, were thought to be lost. But the DOJ Inspector General says they were able to recover them. And the texts are giving backing to Republicans who believe special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into possible Russian collusion during the presidential election is biased because both Strzok and Page worked briefly on the Russia probe, and many of their texts suggest an anti-Trump sentiment. The Strzok-Page texts also show back in March of 2016 there was a proposal circulating, at least in some meetings, to name former U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald as a special prosecutor of a possible Clinton email probe. However, Fitzgerald was never appointed despite Republicans calling for it. Now, Senator Grassley, who released the recovered text messages, say the timing is disconcerting, and it's not the first time lawmakers have been critical of the DOJ, prompting the Attorney General to defend his department.
We demand the highest level of integrity, ethics, and professionalism from every person in the Department of Justice. Everyone is expected to advance the mission of the department honorably in service to the American people.
And Attorney General Sessions is asking his employees to hear the concerns of Congress and act on them, saying their first priority should be to serve with integrity and fairness. Leah?
All right, Lauren Blanchard, thank you. Well, President Trump's first State of the Union address will set the tone for the White House agenda in 2018. So let's bring in Associated Press White House reporter Jill Colvin for more insight on what we can expect from the president's remarks. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
All right, so last year when the president spoke, he only really had 40 days in office, so it wasn't technically a State of the Union address. We know that Stephen Miller and Staff Secretary Rob Porter have been working on this, along with Chief of Staff John Kelly. What do you expect from this State of the Union address?
Well, this is a really important speech for the president. This is where he's going to lay out his agenda for his second year in office, and we've got a lot of different balls that are moving around. We really expect the president to spend a lot of time talking about what he's accomplished so far. A lot of the economic stats are very positive here, so we expect him to talk a lot about the GDP, the economy, but he also needs to lay out his agenda for what's coming up. So we expect the president to talk at length about his infrastructure plan. This is something he's been talking about for quite a while, that they've been hyping for quite a while, and something that's kind of going to be a key part of the year going forward. We also expect the president to spend quite a bit of time talking about defense, also talking about immigration. The White House just on Friday released its framework that you guys were talking about a little bit earlier, about what the president would like to see in any type of legislative package. And so we expect the president to really lay that out for the first time to the American people.
Okay, so you mentioned that the president's going to want to talk about his accomplishments. That is something this president likes to talk about, as most politicians do. So let's take a look at the latest polls in terms of his favorability. All right, the latest Fox News poll shows that 45% of those polled view President Trump as favorable, compared to 53% unfavorable. And if you can compare that to back in October of last year, 39% of people were viewing him as favorable of those polled. So I want to ask, how much is his favorability going to play into the way he presents? Is he going to want to present more to his base, or is he going to want to try to sort of get the general American public win them to his side.
You know, what's so notable about this speech is it's one that's really geared to the American public. It's not like a typical Trump rally speech where he's talking to his base, where he's trying to rile up a room of supporters. And the tax plan that the Republicans pushed through at the end of last year has proven to be quite popular, not as popular as they would like it to be, but there's been a lot of positive headlines about companies giving employees bonuses, and the president's going to want to use that momentum to push forward. The problem is that he's got an incredibly difficult landscape here with Congress. There is so much dispute. I mean, at this point, they can't even pass a budget. We're on these temporary short-term funding measures, and so there's all of this kind of difficulty and back and forth that's getting in the way of what he wants to try to accomplish.
You know, and speaking of that, I want to talk about this because you always see those cutaways of the audience, members of Congress, and who they bring as guests. Oftentimes, those guests are there really to make a statement. So we know that some of the Democrats are going to be bringing Dreamers. We're also going to be seeing people wearing black. Can you explain?
Yeah. So this is really kind of the political theater event of the year. It's kind of where all the political dorks in Washington get very, very excited. There are already about a handful of Democratic lawmakers who say they're going to boycott. They're not interested in being there with the president, and they're also bringing along guests. Nancy Pelosi, for instance, is one who's going to be bringing these so-called Dreamers along. We expect to have a whole number of those in the audience. This is also a year where sexual assault, sexual harassment has become a top headline issue. And so we also expect a number of victims and advocates for sexual assault to be part of that audience, something that we've seen, in other public events like at the Golden Globes as well.
All right, and we know the rebuttal will be by Representative Joe Kennedy III, who's, of course, of the Kennedy legacy. And we'll see what happens. Thanks so much for joining us, Jill Colvin. Nice to see you. All right, and coming up tomorrow on Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace talks to White House Legislative Affairs Director Mark Short. Check your local listings for time and channel. And on Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz and his panel will discuss the latest coverage of the Russia investigation. That'll be at 11 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. Plus, tune in Tuesday for a full day of special coverage of, as we've just been talking about it, President Trump's first State of the Union.
Violence in Afghanistan exploding with an attack today, killing at least 95. Terrorists reportedly hid the bomb in an ambulance. This comes just a week after the Taliban stormed Kabul's main international hotel, killing 22. David Lee Miller live in our Mideast Bureau with the latest, where it is already late Saturday night there. Good evening, David.
Leland, the head of the United Nations mission in Afghanistan is calling this attack, quoting now, an atrocity, not only because of the death toll and the great number of people who were injured, but because an ambulance, a vehicle that is so often associated with saving lives, was used to transport the bomb. The Taliban have taken responsibility. A government spokesman says 4 people have now been arrested. According to authorities, the explosive-laden ambulance made its way past a checkpoint in central Kabul. The driver told police he was taking a patient to a nearby hospital. Then, at a second checkpoint, he detonated the bomb. The explosion took place near government offices, embassies, and many shops. Many of the dead were civilians, but security forces were also killed. Dozens of cars were destroyed, windows of buildings shattered. Police, the military, and firefighters raced to the scene. Hospitals were simply overwhelmed by the number of injured. Now, this attack comes exactly 1 week after the Taliban attacked a Kabul hotel, killing more than 20 people, including 4 Americans. And 3 days ago in the city of Jalalabad, ISIS attacked the offices of the aid group there, Save the Children. This latest attack is only going to increase pressure on the Afghan government, as well as the U.S., to try and contain militants in the country. The U.S.-led international force in Afghanistan, meanwhile, says that none of its members were killed in today's explosion. Leland?
All right, David Lee Miller, back to you as developments happen in Afghanistan. David, thanks. Leah?
Coming up, Las Vegas casino mogul Steve Wynn faces new sexual harassment claims. And Democrats, well, they've jumped on the story. We'll tell you why up next. Plus, as President Trump prepares for his first State of the Union, we'll find out what America outside the Washington Beltway wants to hear from him. And another West Coast state makes a move to shield people in this country illegally. It all has to do with the DMV.
We have stopped releasing information relative to immigration violations, and from here forward, we are going to require a court order to do such.
Wynn Resorts, their board is opening an investigation on their founder and CEO, Steve Wynn, over allegations of sexual misconduct. This broke yesterday as the Wall Street Journal detailed a pattern of harassment and abuse that allegedly went on for decades. Will Carr joining us from L.A. as the fallout continues. Hi, Will.
Leland, the Wall Street Journal laying out alarming and detailed allegations against Steve Wynn. The Journal reporting that it contacted more than 150 people, dozens of whom conveyed a pattern of alleged sexual misconduct by Wynn that lasted for decades. One of the more damning allegations comes from a manicurist who accuses Wynn of forcing her to have sex with him back in 2005. According to the Journal, Wynn later paid the woman $7.5 million in a settlement. Responding to the story, Wynn told the Wall Street Journal, "The idea that I ever assaulted any woman is preposterous." He goes on to say the accusations stem from a battle with his ex-wife over a divorce settlement. But the Journal detailed other sexual misconduct allegations against Wynn, whose 76th birthday is today. He's a larger-than-life figure in Las Vegas. He's helped build numerous hotels and casinos and took over as the finance chairman for the Republican National Committee after President Trump took office. Wynn is now the latest powerful male figure to be accused of sexual misconduct. Of course, it all started with the allegations against Harvey Weinstein. Is now rippled into a range of different industries. Leland.
Now, lots of ripples indeed. Will Carr in Los Angeles. Will, thank you. Wynn Resorts stock already down 10%, and it's rippled all the way across the country here to Washington. We remember Harvey Weinstein that Will just brought up, and there was this outcry by Republicans of will the Democratic Party and will Democrats give back political donations that were given by Weinstein. Right. Now, what's good for the goose may be good for the gander. It's Democrats now saying, well, should the Republicans and other Republican candidates give back money
Leland,
from Steve Wynn?
It really is a good point for them to make, except that you have to look at the evidence. And with Weinstein, there was so much evidence that was laid out. And I think at this point, with Wynn, he's denying the allegations. So the question is, are they jumping the gun?
Well, there is, as we have found out so often, there is the court of law, there is the court of public opinion, and then there is the court of a $7.5 million settlement as well. So a lot to break down there.
Yeah, there certainly is. All right. Well, still ahead, President Trump is getting ready to deliver his first State of the Union address, what the president may say, and what his supporters hope to hear about his upcoming agenda. And states and federal immigration officials are taking sides, why one state is saying no thanks to federal orders.
This is like trying to make this a sanctuary state. If we're not going to allow federal agencies to go after those that are committing crimes in our cities, in our communities, and our state.
A Fox News alert, we're getting an update from the Michigan Attorney General about his investigation on how Michigan State University handled the case surrounding disgraced former sports medicine doctor Larry Nassar.
My department in this investigation will find out who knew what and when, who took action, who failed to take action, what did or did not happen, and what should have happened.
Of course, so many of us were watching earlier this week when Nassar was sentenced to 40 to 175 years in prison after hearing from so many of those victims.
Tough stuff. The White House speechwriting team spending this weekend putting the finishing touches on President Trump's first State of the Union address. He received high marks for his speech this week in Davos, explaining that America first doesn't mean America alone, he said. For more on the president's message coming up, talk radio host Mark Davis, 660 a.m. on your dial in the Big D. And if you like what he has to say, you can check him out on the internet worldwide. Mark, good to see you. We are a year past the inauguration. The inauguration speech was American carnage. Then you've got Davos, America is not America first, isn't America alone. What does the State of the Union look like?
I think it will contain elements of both because they are both central to the Trump personality, and they are not mutually exclusive. When the president 1 year ago in his inauguration talked about the dire circumstances that we all face in tackling a lot of very serious problems at home and around the world, he was right. Just the other day in Davos, when he reached out to the world and said, look, just because we are America first doesn't mean we're not interested in dealing with you in a congenial way. That's accurate, too. Both are elements of the Trump personality, and both are elements of a proper path forward.
We've seen the president often on this theme of promises made, promises kept. Tax cut, promise made, promise kept. Repeal and replace Obamacare, promise made, promise not kept. Building the wall, promise made, promise not kept. How much leeway does his base give him to make this speech in front of Congress and have one more push before the midterms?
Well, let's sit tight on the wall. I mean, this is a promise they're trying very hard to keep, and it's an opportunity to keep that promise, and it's an opportunity to keep an obligation to the so-called DACA kids, and it's an opportunity to keep the promise to the base about getting rid of chain migration and keep the promise about getting rid of that ridiculous diversity lottery. In the State of the Union on Tuesday night, I think he will say, in my open hands, here it is, a DACA solution, a wall solution, chain migration solution, things my base wants, things Democrats want. There is no reason not to take this deal.
We've heard consistently from Democrats that they might be willing to trade DACA for the wall. There is no evidence that they're willing to trade DACA and chain migration and the wall and the visa lottery. It seems like a non-starter. Why make that case?
Because if it is a non-starter, perfect question, here's what I hope is a good answer. If it is a non-starter, it shows how unserious they really are about border security. Schumer wouldn't even stay with the wall promise, $25 billion, hey, how about $10 billion? They're not serious about the wall. They're not serious about chain migration. They're not serious about diversity lottery because they're not serious about border security at all. It interrupts a future flow of reliable Democrat voters. So in a way, keep in mind, it is Donald Trump. And I think the other day when he upset even some in his base by seeming a little too accommodating about the DACA kids, it was designed to make the left react negatively so that on Tuesday night he can say, look, I gave them more than my base wanted to give, and they still wouldn't take it. That's how unserious the left is.
We were watching some video there from the government shutdown debate in terms of when there was some DACA kids and some protesters that were brought there by the Democrats. I want to get your final thought on this. The president's going to talk a lot about the economy. He talked a lot about the economy in Davos. Latest Fox News poll. Has the Trump administration made the economy better or worse? Better 40%, worse 22%. 34% say the same. This is in the face of hundreds of companies offering huge bonuses, billions, if not trillions of dollars being brought back to the United States, record low unemployment, and a record high stock market. Yet only 34% say it's the same and 22% say it's worse. You add that up, that's 56% of Americans who say this president hasn't done much for the economy. What does he have to do differently on Tuesday night to sell Donald Trump as the economic engine of America?
I don't think there's anything magical that he can say that'll make millions of Americans go, oh, how wrong I've been. He is the best thing for the economy since Reagan. But that will become evident the more success we have. In polling, I think we've all learned in the last couple of years there's a kind of a phenomenon, a social desirability bias, it's often called, where people just don't want to tell pollsters that they think Trump is awesome. And there are a lot of people who recognize they saw the raise that they either just got or they're about to get in their paychecks, and they know why that raise is there. I'm not suggesting it's a guaranteed landslide for him in 2020, but a lot of those people hesitating to tell a pollster that he is the reason why, they know full well in the secret of the ballot box they'll reward him, unless they're just all-out haters. That's the 20-some% who will never admit it.
And you make a good point that there may be some holdouts here who are skeptical or saying, okay, maybe I've gotten a raise, maybe my 401k is up, but I'm going to see for the next 6 or 8 or 12 months if that holds before I give the president any credit.
It takes time. It took time with Reagan. And Reagan didn't make a lot of converts in his first year. It took a little time.
Yeah, that is an excellent point in history, especially when everything else we want now instantly on Twitter. Mark, great to have you as always. We'll look for your opinions coming up. Good to see you. Leah?
Well, coming up, a deadly attack by the Taliban in Afghanistan, what the U.S. can do to curb the insurgent group. And somber words from Secretary of State Rex Tillerson at the site of a major historical atrocity in Poland. How the Secretary's trip highlights the need for strength and solidarity.
As we mark this day in solemn remembrance, let us repeat the words of our own commitment. Never again. Never again.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson two-day trip to Poland included a somber visit to the Warsaw Ghetto Heroes Monument for Holocaust Remembrance Day. The site is a tribute to the Jewish uprising against the Nazis during World War II. Tillerson placed a wreath at the memorial and acknowledged the importance of remembering the events that took place now more than 60 years ago.
The Taliban has claimed responsibility for a devastating car bombing outside the Afghan capital of Kabul. The bombing, which killed at least 95 people, was the latest in a string of brazen attacks by the insurgent group. Here to weigh in is Fox News senior strategic analyst, General Jack Keane. General, nice to see you.
Good to see you, Leah. Welcome to Washington.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Well, so this is the third major urban assault by militants in less than a week. This happened in what's known as the Ring of Steel, which is supposed to be this sort of government-protected area. Your reaction to seeing this uptick in activity there?
Well, the Taliban normally have a spring offensive coming out of the harsh winter. I think this clearly is, we got this uptick largely from the Haqqani network, was a derivative of the Taliban. They conduct mostly all the attacks in Kabul, not every attack, but over the 16 years, the overwhelming majority of those attacks. I think they're supported by the Pakistanis. They have a safe haven inside of Pakistan. The United States policy is trying to push back on the Pakistanis. This is likely something of a reaction to that before the spring offensive begins. In other words, they're pushing back on U.S. policy.
I just recently spoke with a source at CENTCOM who told me that a lot of the air assets that were working on Syria have been moved over to sort of take the same strategy in Afghanistan, where in Syria they were going after the ISIS revenue sources like oil. Now in Afghanistan they're going after the drug facilities to try to go after some of the areas where they're creating revenue. What do you think of this strategy?
Well, I overall agree strategically with the Trump administration's position on Afghanistan. One, they made a decision to stay, and that's totally different than the position we were dealing with the previous administration. Secondly, they've decided to increase the resources, as you indicated, more lethal resources, and also a policy change. Afghanistan is the largest poppy field, which leads to heroin in the entire world, and now they have permission to go after the distribution centers that drive that outside the country and populate the world with that horrible drug. So yeah, and that's a major source of income for the Taliban. But the real problem, Leah, in Afghanistan, even when we do all of that, nothing will actually change to our favor unless we eliminate the two safe havens that the Taliban have in Pakistan. And cutting off the money with Pakistan is a first step. I'm talking about foreign aid. They'll make that up easily with the Chinese. Yeah. Secondly, if Pakistan does not shut down the assistance they're providing at those safe havens, and I'm talking about intelligence on U.S. and Afghan operations, resources, if they don't stop that, then we have got to go after those ourselves. And this would be the first president that's ever made that decision.
I know this is so hard to see. You retired in 2003. I was deployed to Jalalabad, where one of these attacks occurred earlier this week. I was there back in 2008. So it's difficult for a lot of us to see this violence increasing. But I want to ask you about the strategy, the President Trump's strategy in Afghanistan. Is this violence that we're seeing any indication of how that's going, or is it too early to tell at this point?
Well, as I said, I think it's this violence is likely as a result of some kind of message sending to the administration that, we're still here and we're going to continue to push our objectives. We just got to be really tough on those sanctuaries or else we won't succeed.
Okay. While I've got you, I want to turn to Syria for a minute. Turkey basically started a military operation against the Kurds, the YPG, on January 20th. They want the U.S. to stop supporting the Kurds. I want to take a listen to what Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said earlier today. Take a listen.
What we hope is that Turkey is able to satisfy that it has addressed its security concerns on its border and it can limit the amount of fighting that goes on, because clearly there are civilian casualties every time this happened, and we're already seeing those casualties. We also continue our dialogue with Turkey to address their legitimate concerns along the border.
Can you read between the lines for us a little bit on what Secretary of State Tillerson is really trying to say here?
Well, the United States policy on Syria, they've just went through a review and they just announced it. One is to try to get a political settlement in Syria without Assad. I think that's pure fantasy, because the Russians and the Iranians have had military success. They propped up the regime. Assad is going to stay as long as the Iranians and the Russians want him. They may switch him out at some point just for convenience sake, but there's not going to be a political settlement that's going to get him out of there. Number two, we want to push back on al-Qaeda inside of Syria. Makes sense. We also want to stop the advance of the Iranians. To do both of those, and also to prevent the return of ISIS, we need to enfranchise the Sunnis. That's why ISIS and al-Qaeda exist, because they radicalize Sunnis. The Sunnis inside Syria are the majority, and they're politically disenfranchised. They've been crushed, largely because the Russians and the Syrians did that. The Russians, Syrians, and the Iranians did it. But Obama refused to help the Syrian moderates, other than a small covert problem with anti-tank weapons. That has contributed to the problem we have. And until we resolve that issue, it's likely we're not going to have any success.
All right. Well, hopefully with this administration, we'll see some changes. General Jack Keane, thank you.
Good talking to you, Leah.
Nice to see you. Leland?
Fighting since 2014 has pushed the Arab world's most poverty-stricken nation to the brink of disaster. The U.S. is encouraging Saudi Arabia to do more to help Yemen, and President Trump is making it a point of emphasis in his foreign policy. Our Jillian Turner has more now on the situation.
When we cook food, there's not enough for the children, and we get up hungry. If we have lunch, we don't have dinner, and if we have breakfast, then we don't have lunch.
In Yemen, the Middle East's poorest country, the world's largest humanitarian crisis is brewing, with 75% of the population in need of immediate food and medical aid, and 11 million Yemenis on the verge of starvation. The UN warns of the largest famine the world has seen in decades. A senior administration official tells Fox News it's a top-tier priority for President Trump personally.
The president was very concerned about the humanitarian
in Yemen, pitting Saudi Arabia, a U.S. ally, against Iran in a violent proxy conflict. The president's congressional allies are hopeful he'll seize this moment to leverage the U.S.-Saudi friendship.
To his credit, the President of the United States on December 6 spoke up about this issue very clearly and indicated that the Saudi behavior must improve.
Saudi Arabia's military continually threatening to impose blockades at Yemen's ports, which run contrary to international law and U.S. national security interests. But a hopeful sign this week as the Saudis rolled out a new humanitarian plan for the country. Humanitarian groups say President Trump must do more to assuage suffering and insist the situation demands urgency.
Those children could well die. Save the Children has said they think one child is dying about every 10 minutes already, and it could get considerably worse.
And just this week, a temporary month-long agreement between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia expired. And now administration officials are working overtime behind the scenes to keep Saudi Arabia's aid blockade lifted. The international community standing anxiously by to see whether President Trump can cut a deal that prevents this crisis from becoming a catastrophe. In Washington, Jillian Turner, Fox News.
And still ahead, one state is giving federal immigration authorities the cold shoulder, why they say they won't provide information on illegal immigrants to ICE. As Congress faces a deadline to deal with the DACA program, illegal immigration remains as one of the most divisive issues in the nation. In Washington state, pro-immigration Governor Jay Inslee is ordering state officials to stop releasing personal information to federal immigration authorities on people who have entered the country illegally. Fox News correspondent Dan Springer has more on that story.
Getting a driver's license in the state of Washington does not require U.S. citizenship, but the state did record where applicants were born. When Democratic Governor Jay Inslee learned the Department of Licensing was sharing that information with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, he put up his own wall to block that cooperation.
We believe the people we have helped educate, who've been here for decades,
deserve to have the protection we've already given them. And it's most unfortunate that the president and his ICE is essentially threatening them with deportation.
The DMV was treating ICE exactly like every other law enforcement agency, providing collected information only when given a name and specific crime being investigated. Now, ICE alone has a much higher bar.
We have stopped releasing information relative to immigration violations, and from here forward, we are going to require a court order to do such.
Inslee has also hired a special assistant to make sure no state agency gives ICE anything not required by law. Some Republican lawmakers are angry.
This is like trying to make this a sanctuary state. If we're not going to allow federal agencies to go after those that are committing crimes in our cities and our communities and our state, that's what it amounts to.
ICE's acting director Thomas Homan said policies like Inslee's might violate federal laws against harboring illegal aliens. Illegal immigration hardliners agree.
He is picking and choosing which law enforcement agencies he's going to give information to. He doesn't get to do that.
An ICE official tells Fox News these licensing inquiries are never blanket fishing expeditions, but targeted criminal investigations of those who are deemed to be a public safety threat or a national security risk. And now the job just got harder. In Seattle, Dan Springer, Fox News.
So is the president's offer of a wall for dealing with DACA a fair trade?